Runaway boy dragged Alpha's daughter from icy water. Next day, the pack changed his life. The winter of 1847 settled over the Appalachian Mountains like a heavy blanket, turning the forests of western North Carolina into a realm of white silence. Snow clung to the bare branches of oak and hickory trees, and the wind howled through the valleys with a voice that seemed to carry warnings from the old world. In this unforgiving landscape, a boy ran. Elijah Thorne was 14 years old, though the hardness in his eyes made him appear older. His threadbare coat did little against the biting cold, and his boots, 2 sizes too small and worn through at the soles, left bloody prints in the snow. He'd been running for 3 days now, ever since he'd fled the lumber camp where he'd been indentured after his father's death. The foreman's cruelty had finally become too much to bear, and when the man had raised his hand one time too many, Elijah had struck back and run. He knew what awaited runaways. He'd seen other boys dragged back, seen the scars they carried afterward. The foreman, a brutal man named Silas Crenshaw, had made examples of those who tried to escape. Elijah had watched as one boy, no older than 12, had been whipped in front of the entire camp, his screams echoing through the timber stands. Another had been locked in the ice house for 2 days, emerging with frostbitten fingers that would never work properly again. Elijah knew he'd rather freeze in these mountains than return to that hell. The lumber camp had been his prison for 8 months, ever since the fever had taken his father. Jonathan Thorne had been a good man, a carpenter who'd fallen on hard times after Elijah's mother died in childbirth when he was just a baby. They'd moved from town to town, his father taking whatever work he could find, always promising that things would get better. And they had been getting better. His father had secured steady work at a furniture maker's shop in Asheville, and for the first time in years, they'd had enough to eat and a warm place to sleep. Then the fever came. It swept through Asheville like a scythe, taking the old and the young and the unlucky. His father had lasted 5 days, burning up from the inside, delirious, and calling for Elijah's mother. When he died, he left nothing but debts that Elijah, as his only living relative, was expected to pay. Before we continue with Elijah's journey, if you're enjoying this story, please subscribe and leave a comment telling us where you're watching from. Now let's see what fate has in store for our young runaway. The town magistrate had been unsympathetic. "The boy can work off the debt," he'd said, as if Elijah weren't standing right there. "Silas Crenshaw needs workers at his lumber camp. 7 years should cover what's owed." 7 years. Elijah would be 21 by then, if he survived that long. Most indentured workers didn't. The camp had been worse than he'd imagined. They worked from dawn until dusk, felling trees in the freezing cold, hauling logs through snow that sometimes came up to their waists. The food was meager, watery soup and hard bread that was often moldy. The sleeping quarters were overcrowded, with 20 boys crammed into a cabin meant for 10, sharing thin blankets and fighting over spots near the stove. But it was Crenshaw's cruelty that made it unbearable. The man seemed to take pleasure in their suffering, finding reasons to withhold food or add extra work. He had his favorites, boys who informed on the others, who did his dirty work in exchange for slightly better treatment. Elijah had refused to become one of them, and that had made him a target. The beating that had finally driven him to run had come over nothing. A log that Crenshaw claimed wasn't cut properly, though Elijah knew it was fine. The foreman had struck him across the face with the back of his hand, splitting his lip. When Elijah had instinctively raised his arms to protect himself, Crenshaw had grabbed a length of wood. That's when something inside Elijah had snapped. He'd shoved the man hard, sending him sprawling into the snow, and then he'd run. He'd grabbed what he could: his thin coat, a half loaf of bread from the kitchen, a knife he'd stolen from the tool shed, and disappeared into the forest. He knew Crenshaw would send men after him, knew they'd have dogs and horses and guns. So he'd run through the night and into the next day, pushing himself beyond exhaustion, following the ridgelines where the snow was thinner and his tracks would be harder to follow. By the 3rd day, He'd begun to think he might actually make it. The sounds of pursuit had faded, and he'd seen no sign of Crenshaw's men. But the cold was becoming a more dangerous enemy than any human hunter. His stolen bread was long gone, and he'd found nothing to eat in the frozen forest. His feet were numb, and he could no longer feel his fingers. He knew the signs of frostbite, knew that if he didn't find shelter soon, he'd lose his extremities or worse. The sun was beginning its descent when Elijah heard it, a sound that didn't belong to the winter forest. A crack, sharp and terrible, followed by a splash and a scream that cut through the cold air like a knife. His survival instinct told him to keep moving, to mind his own business, but something deeper pulled him toward the sound. Maybe it was the memory of his father, who had always helped those in need, even when they had nothing themselves. Maybe it was simple human decency, or maybe it was fate. He pushed through a thicket of mountain laurel and emerged at the edge of a frozen pond. The ice had broken near the center, and there, thrashing in the dark water, was a girl. She couldn't have been more than 12, her dark hair plastered to her face, her arms flailing as she tried to grab the edge of the ice that kept breaking under her weight. She was wearing a heavy wool coat that was now soaked through, dragging her down like an anchor. "Help!" she screamed, her voice already weakening from the cold. "Please, someone help me." Elijah didn't think. He couldn't afford to think. If he stopped to consider the danger, to weigh his own survival against hers, he might hesitate, and hesitation would kill her. He ran to the edge of the pond, testing the ice with each step. It groaned beneath him, spiderweb cracks spreading from where his feet landed. The girl's movements were becoming slower, more desperate. She was losing the fight. "Hold on!" he shouted, dropping to his belly to distribute his weight. The ice was cold against his chest, so cold it burned through his thin shirt. He crawled forward, ignoring the way the ice groaned and shifted beneath him, ignoring the water that was seeping through the cracks and soaking into his clothes. When he was close enough, he reached out his arm. "Grab my hand!" Her eyes, wide with terror, locked onto his. Her fingers, blue with cold, latched onto his wrist with surprising strength, the desperate grip of someone who knows they're dying. He pulled, his muscles screaming in protest, his own body sliding forward on the treacherous ice. For a terrifying moment, he thought they'd both go under, that his attempt to save her would only result in 2 deaths instead of 1. Then his feet found purchase against a ridge in the ice, and he pulled harder, putting every ounce of strength he had left into dragging her from the water. The girl came up out of the pond like a caught fish, gasping and shaking, water streaming from her clothes and hair. But Elijah didn't stop pulling. He crawled backward, dragging her with him, until they were both back on solid ground, away from the treacherous pond. She collapsed in the snow, her whole body convulsing with shivers, her lips turning blue. Ice was already forming in her hair, and her teeth chattered so violently he could hear them clicking together. Elijah knew about hypothermia, had seen men die from it at the lumber camp. She had minutes, not hours. "We need to get you warm," Elijah said, though he had no idea how. He had no fire, no shelter, nothing but the clothes on his back. Still, he stripped off his thin coat, the only thing standing between him and the freezing air, and wrapped it around her shoulders. It wouldn't be enough, but it was something. My father," she managed through chattering teeth, each word an effort. "The settlement, not far." "Can you walk?" Elijah asked, already knowing the answer. Her legs were probably numb, her muscles seizing from the cold. She tried to stand, but her legs buckled immediately, and she would have fallen face first into the snow if Elijah hadn't caught her. Without hesitation, he scooped her up in his arms. She was lighter than he expected, or perhaps desperation gave him strength he didn't know he possessed. "Which way?" She pointed with a trembling hand toward the east, where the mountains rose in dark silhouettes against the darkening sky. Elijah started walking, carrying her through the deepening snow as the sun continued its descent. Every step was agony. His feet were numb, his arms ached from carrying her weight, and his own body was beginning to succumb to the cold now that he'd given up his coat. But he kept moving, because stopping meant death for both of them. The girl's shivering began to slow, which Elijah knew was a bad sign. When the body stopped shivering, it meant it was giving up, shutting down. "Stay with me," he said, jostling her slightly. "What's your name?" "Sarah," she whispered. "I'm Elijah. You're going to be fine, Sarah. Just stay awake. Talk to me. Tell me about your family." "Father, Thomas," she managed. "Brother, James, mother, died 2 years ago." "I'm sorry," Elijah said, thinking of his own losses. "My mother died when I was born. My father just died a few months ago. So I understand." "Alone?" Sarah asked, her eyes struggling to focus on his face. "Yeah, alone. Until now," he thought, but didn't say. "Until I decided to save you instead of saving myself." The forest seemed endless, and with each step, Elijah felt his own strength fading. His vision was starting to blur at the edges, and he stumbled more frequently. He'd given everything to save this girl, and now they might both die out here in the frozen wilderness. But then, just as true darkness fell and the first stars began to appear, he saw it, a light flickering through the trees. The settlement appeared as darkness fell, a collection of log cabins clustered in a valley, smoke rising from their chimneys like prayers to the winter sky. It was larger than Elijah had expected, maybe 15 or 20 buildings arranged in a rough circle around a central common area. Light glowed from windows, and he could hear voices, people calling out in alarm. As Elijah stumbled toward the nearest building, a door burst open and a man emerged, tall and broad-shouldered, his face etched with panic. He was massive, easily 6.5 feet tall, with dark hair and a beard that was just beginning to show gray at the temples. His eyes, even in the dim light, seemed to glow with an intensity that was almost frightening. "Sarah," he roared, running toward them with a speed that seemed impossible for a man his size. "My God, Sarah!" The man took the girl from Elijah's arms with surprising gentleness, cradling her as if she weighed nothing. Elijah's legs finally gave out, and he fell to his knees in the snow, his vision swimming. He heard voices, felt hands on him, multiple people lifting him, carrying him. Someone was saying something about frostbite, about hypothermia, about getting them both inside immediately. The last thing Elijah saw before the world went dark was the man's face, looking down at him with an expression of profound gratitude and something else, something that looked almost like recognition, as if he'd been waiting for Elijah to arrive. When Elijah woke, he was lying on a bed, an actual bed with a real mattress and quilts piled high. The room was warm, heated by a stone fireplace where logs crackled and popped, sending dancing shadows across wooden walls. For a moment he thought he was dreaming, or perhaps he'd died and this was some kind of afterlife. Then the pain hit, his feet throbbing, his hands burning as feeling returned to his frozen fingers, his chest aching with each breath. He tried to sit up and immediately regretted it. His head spun, and nausea rolled through his stomach. A hand pressed gently on his shoulder, pushing him back down. "Easy, son," a woman's voice said. "You're safe, but you need to rest. You nearly froze to death out there." Elijah turned his head to see an older woman sitting beside the bed. She had gray hair pulled back in a bun, and sharp, intelligent eyes that studied him with a healer's assessment. Her hands, as she checked his pulse, were steady and sure. "Sarah?" Elijah croaked, his throat raw. "She's fine, thanks to you. Cold and scared, but fine. Doctor says she'll make a full recovery." The woman smiled. "I'm Margaret. I'm the healer here in Wolfridge. And you, young man, are very lucky. Another hour out there and you'd have lost your feet, maybe your hands too. As it is, you've got some frostbite, but nothing permanent. How long have I been asleep? A day and a half. We kept you sedated while your body recovered from the hypothermia. You were in bad shape when they brought you in. She poured water from a pitcher into a cup and helped him drink. Thomas, that's Sarah's father. He's been checking on you every few hours. He'll want to know you're awake. As if summoned by his name, the door opened and the man from the night before entered, carrying a tray of food. In the daylight, or what passed for daylight through the window, Elijah could see him more clearly. Thomas Blackwood was indeed massive, with the build of someone who'd spent his life doing hard physical labor. But there was a grace to his movements that seemed at odds with his size, and his eyes, now that Elijah could see them properly, were an unusual amber color. "You're awake," Thomas said, his voice deep and measured. He set the tray on a small table beside the bed. "How do you feel?" "Like I got trampled by a horse," Elijah admitted. "But alive. The girl, Sarah, Margaret says she's okay?" "She's fine, thanks to you. Doctor says she'll make a full recovery. No lasting damage." Thomas pulled up a chair and sat, studying Elijah with eyes that seemed to see everything. Every bruise, every old scar, every secret. "You saved her life. If you hadn't been there, if you hadn't acted so quickly, I would have lost her, just like I lost her mother." "I just did what anyone would do," Elijah said, uncomfortable with the intensity of the man's gratitude. "No," Thomas said firmly, leaning forward. "Most people would have kept walking. Most people would have saved themselves. You were clearly running from something, clearly in no condition to help anyone. But you stopped. You risked your life for a stranger. That tells me everything I need to know about your character." Elijah didn't know what to say to that. He'd never thought of himself as particularly brave or noble. He'd just seen someone who needed help and helped them. It seemed like the most basic thing in the world. "What's your name, son?" Thomas asked. "Elijah. Elijah Thorne." "And what's a boy like you doing out in the wilderness in the dead of winter, Elijah Thorne? Running from what?" The question hung in the air. Elijah knew he could lie, could make up some story about getting lost or separated from a traveling party. But something about Thomas Blackwood's steady gaze made him want to tell the truth. Maybe it was the kindness in the man's eyes, or maybe it was simply that Elijah was tired of lying, tired of hiding. "I was running from a lumber camp up north," he said quietly. "I was indentured there after my father died. He left debts, and the magistrate said I had to work them off. 7 years. He paused, then added, "The foreman was cruel. He beat us, starved us. I finally fought back, and then I ran." Thomas nodded slowly, as if this confirmed something he'd already suspected. "And now?" "Now I don't know. I can't go back. They'll—" He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. They both knew what happened to runaways who were caught. "How old are you, Elijah?" 14. I'll be 15 in the spring." 14, Thomas repeated, shaking his head. "Just a boy. You should be in school, learning a trade, not running for your life through frozen mountains." He stood and moved to the window, looking out at the settlement beyond. "Tell me, Elijah, what do you know about this place? About Wolfridge?" "Nothing. I didn't even know it existed until Sarah told me about it." "Good. That's how we like it." Thomas turned back to face him. "This place, we call it Wolfridge. It's a community of families who came here to build something new, away from the old rules and old ways. We take care of our own, we protect each other, and we don't ask too many questions about where people came from or what they're running from." Hope flickered in Elijah's chest, but he tried to keep it from showing on his face. He'd learned not to hope too much. "I should go," he said, though the words hurt. "I don't want to bring trouble to your door." if the foreman sends men looking for me." "Let them come," Thomas said, and there was something dangerous in his voice, something that made Elijah think this was not a man to be trifled with. "They won't find you here, and if they do, they'll wish they hadn't." He moved back to the chair and sat down again. "Stay, Elijah, at least until spring. We can always use another pair of hands, and you've more than earned your keep by saving my daughter's life." "I don't have anything to offer," Elijah said. "No skills, no money, nothing. You have courage, you have compassion, you have a good heart. That's more valuable than any skill." Thomas leaned back in his chair. "I'll be honest with you, Elijah. There's something about you, something I recognized the moment I saw you. Call it instinct, call it fate. But I think you were meant to find us. I think you were meant to save Sarah, and I think you're meant to stay." "Are you sure?" Elijah asked, hardly daring to believe it. "I'm sure. But there's something you should know about this place, about us." Thomas's expression grew serious, and his amber eyes seemed to glow in the firelight. "We're not like other settlements. We have our own ways, our own laws. We protect each other, but we also expect loyalty and honesty from everyone who lives here. Can you give us that?" "Yes, sir," Elijah said without hesitation. After months of cruelty and lies at the lumber camp, the idea of a place built on loyalty and honesty sounded like paradise. "Good. Then welcome to Wolfridge, Elijah Thorne. For now you're a guest. But if you prove yourself, if you show us you're trustworthy, you might become something more. You might become family." Thomas stood and gestured to the tray of food. "Eat. Margaret says you need to build your strength back up. When you're feeling better, we'll get you some proper clothes and find you work to do. Everyone contributes here. Everyone has a role. We'll find yours." Over the next few days, as Elijah recovered his strength, he began to understand the unique nature of the settlement. Wolfridge was home to about 40 families, all of them bound together by something deeper than just proximity. They worked together with an efficiency that seemed almost supernatural. When a barn needed raising, it was done in a day. When a family fell ill, others appeared with food and medicine without being asked. The settlement was remarkably self-sufficient. They had hunters who always seemed to return with game, farmers who coaxed crops from the Rocky Mountain soil, craftsmen who could build or repair anything. There was a blacksmith, a tanner, a weaver, a miller. Children attended a small school run by a stern but kind woman named Elizabeth. There was even a small chapel, though Elijah noticed that services were held at unusual times. Never during the full moon, always during the new moon. And then there was the way they moved. Elijah noticed it first with the children, who seemed to run through the forest with impossible grace, never stumbling, never getting lost. They could climb trees like squirrels and seemed to have an uncanny sense of direction. Then, he saw it in the hunters, who always returned with game, who seemed to know where every animal in the mountains could be found. They moved with a fluid grace that was almost feline, and their senses seemed impossibly acute. There were other oddities, too. The settlement had no dogs, which seemed strange for a frontier community. The people ate their meat very rare, almost raw. And there was a tension in the air around the full moon, a restlessness that seemed to affect everyone. But despite these peculiarities, or perhaps because of them, Elijah felt more at home in Wolfridge than he had anywhere since his father's death. The people were kind, welcoming him without reservation. They gave him clothes, good, warm clothes that actually fit. They gave him a small cabin to himself, a luxury he'd never experienced. And they gave him work. Thomas assigned him to work with Marcus, a boy of 16 who was in charge of the settlement's wood pile. It was hard work, but nothing like the brutal labor at the lumber camp. Marcus was patient, teaching Elijah the proper way to split logs, how to stack them so they'd dry properly, how to identify different types of wood and their uses. Oak for long-burning fires, Marcus explained as they worked. Pine for quick heat. Hickory for smoking meat. You'll learn all of it. He paused, then added, Thomas must really like you. He doesn't usually take in strays. I'm not a stray, Elijah said, a bit defensively. I saved his daughter. I know. Everyone knows. That's why you're here. Marcus grinned. But saving Sarah is one thing. Staying is another. Not everyone who comes to Wolfridge gets to stay permanently. Thomas is careful about who he lets into the pack. The pack? Elijah asked, but Marcus suddenly looked uncomfortable, as if he'd said something he shouldn't have. Just a figure of speech? We're a tight-knit community, that's all. Like a pack. But there was something in his eyes that suggested it was more than just a figure of speech. Sarah recovered quickly, and she sought Elijah out as soon as she was able to leave her bed. She found him in the woodshed, splitting logs for the communal pile, his breath misting in the cold air. You saved my life, she said without preamble, standing in the doorway with her arms crossed. She had her father's directness, her mother's dark eyes. Even at 12, there was a strength to her that commanded respect. You already thanked me, Elijah replied, setting down the axe and wiping sweat from his forehead despite the cold. You don't need to do it again. I'm not thanking you. I'm telling you. She stepped closer, her expression serious beyond her years. In our community, that means something. It means you're pack now, whether you know it or not. It means we're bound together. It means I owe you a life debt. You don't owe me anything, Elijah said, uncomfortable with the intensity of her gaze. I just did what was right. That's exactly why it matters. She smiled, and for a moment, in the dim light of the woodshed, her teeth seemed sharper than they should be, her eyes reflecting the light like an animal's. Father wants to see you tonight, at the main hall. Everyone will be there. It's important. What's it about? You'll see. She turned to leave, then paused and looked back at him. Elijah, thank you for not leaving me to die, for being brave when you didn't have to be. Whatever happens tonight, remember that we're grateful. All of us. That evening, as the sun set and the temperature dropped, Elijah made his way to the largest building in the settlement, a long hall constructed of massive logs, with a roof that peaked high above. It was the kind of building that could have housed 100 people, and as Elijah approached, he could hear voices inside, the murmur of a large gathering. He hesitated at the door, suddenly nervous. What if this was some kind of trial? What if they'd decided he was too much of a risk, that he needed to leave? But then he remembered Sarah's words. We're grateful, and pushed the door open. Inside, every member of the community had gathered, sitting on benches arranged in a circle around a central fire pit. The fire burned bright, casting dancing shadows on the walls and ceiling. Children sat with their parents. Elders sat together, and everyone turned to look as Elijah entered. The attention was overwhelming. Dozens of pairs of eyes all focused on him. Thomas Blackwood stood at the head of the circle, and when Elijah entered, he gestured for him to come forward. Elijah walked slowly, his heart pounding, very aware of every eye watching his progress. Sarah sat near her father, and she gave him an encouraging nod. Elijah Thorne, Thomas said, his voice carrying through the hall with an authority that demanded attention. You came to us as a stranger, running from a hard past. But you showed us your character when you risked your life to save my daughter. Tonight, we offer you a choice. The room was silent except for the crackling of the fire. Elijah could feel the weight of the moment, could sense that whatever was about to happen would change his life forever. You can leave in the spring with supplies and our blessing, free to make your own way in the world, Thomas continued. We'll give you food, warm clothes, tools, even a horse if you want one. You'll leave as a friend of Wolfridge, and if you ever need help, Our doors will be open to you." That sounded generous, more than generous. But Elijah sensed there was more coming. "Or," Thomas said, and his amber eyes seemed to glow brighter, "you can stay and become one of us, truly one of us. But if you choose to stay, you must know the truth of what we are. You must know the secret that we guard with our lives." Elijah's heart hammered in his chest. What truth? Thomas took a deep breath, and around the circle, Elijah saw people leaning forward, their expressions intense. "We are not merely a settlement, Elijah. We are a pack. Our ancestors came from the old country, from Scotland, from Ireland, from the deep forests of Germany, carrying with them a gift or a curse, depending on how you see it. When the moon is full, we change. We become wolves." The words hung in the air, impossible, and yet somehow making perfect sense. Elijah's mind raced, connecting all the oddities he'd observed: the grace, the hunting skills, the way the community moved as one, the absence of dogs, the tension around the full moon. It all fit together like pieces of a puzzle he hadn't known he was solving. "You're werewolves," he said, the word feeling strange on his tongue, like something from a fairy tale or a nightmare. "We prefer shifters. But yes," Thomas said. "We've lived in these mountains for 3 generations, hidden from those who would fear or hunt us. We survive by staying together, by protecting our own, by keeping our secret. And now, because you saved one of ours, because you showed us your heart, we offer you a place among us, not as a human living among wolves, but as one of us, as pack." "But I can't," Elijah stammered, his mind reeling. This was impossible. Werewolves weren't real. They were stories told to frighten children. And yet, looking around the circle at all these faces, he knew it was true. He could see it in their eyes, in the way they held themselves, in the predatory grace that underlay their human forms. "The gift cannot be given lightly," an older woman said from the circle. Elijah recognized her as Margaret, the healer who had tended to him. "But there are rituals, old ways passed down from our ancestors. If you choose to stay, if you choose to become pack, we can make you one of us. The Alpha, Thomas, can give you the bite, and if your body accepts it, you'll transform. You'll become a shifter like us." "And if my body doesn't accept it?" Elijah asked. "Then you'll become very sick, but you'll survive," Margaret said. "It's rare, but it happens. Some people's bodies reject the gift. If that occurs, you'll remain human, and you'll have to leave. We can't risk having someone who knows our secret but isn't bound to us by blood and transformation." Elijah looked around the circle at all the faces watching him. He saw no judgment there, no threat, only acceptance, only welcome. He saw Sarah, who smiled at him with encouragement. He saw Marcus, who gave him a slight nod. He saw children and elders, men and women, all of them waiting for his decision. "What would I have to do?" he asked, turning back to Thomas. "Accept the bite," Thomas said, stepping closer. "Accept the change. Accept the responsibility that comes with being pack. It's not an easy life, Elijah. The transformation is painful, especially at first. The full moon will call to you, and you'll have to answer. You'll have to learn control, learn to balance your human mind with your wolf instincts. And you can never reveal what you are to outsiders. The world isn't ready to know we exist. If our secret got out, we'd be hunted, killed. So you'd be taking on the burden of secrecy, of always being careful, of always protecting the pack. But you'll never be alone again," Sarah added from her seat. "You'll have a family, a purpose, a home. You'll be part of something bigger than yourself. You'll belong." Elijah thought of the lumber camp, of the years of running and hiding that awaited him if he left. He thought of his father, who had always told him that family was the most important thing in the world, that a man without family was a man without roots, and he thought of how it had felt to be part of something these past few days, to be welcomed and valued and needed. "I want to stay," he said, his voice steady despite the fear and excitement coursing through him. "I want to be Pack." A murmur of approval ran through the circle, and Elijah saw smiles breaking out on faces around the room. Thomas smiled too, and it transformed his stern face into something warm and welcoming. "Then we will perform the ritual tomorrow night, under the full moon," Thomas said. "Tonight, you feast with us as a guest. Tomorrow, you'll feast with us as family." The celebration that followed was unlike anything Elijah had ever experienced. Tables were brought out and laden with food in abundance: roasted venison, wild turkey, fresh bread, preserved vegetables from the summer harvest, pies made with dried apples and berries. There was cider and mead, and the adults drank freely while the children ran and played. There was music, too. Someone brought out a fiddle, another a drum, and soon the hall was filled with rhythms that seemed to echo the heartbeat of the forest itself. People danced, their movements fluid and graceful, and Elijah found himself pulled into the celebration, despite his nervousness about what tomorrow would bring. Sarah stayed close to Elijah throughout the evening, introducing him to other young people in the settlement. There was Marcus, who he already knew, who promised to teach him how to hunt in wolf form once he'd transformed. There was Emma, a quiet girl of 15 with gentle eyes, who was learning healing from Margaret, and who told him that the herbs she'd give him tomorrow would help with the pain of transformation. There was James, Sarah's older brother, who was 17 and already being groomed to take a leadership role in the pack. "Don't worry," James said, clapping Elijah on the shoulder with a grip that was stronger than it looked. "The first transformation is rough, but you get used to it. And once you experience running through the forest on 4 legs, feeling the wind in your fur, hunting with the pack, nothing else compares. It's freedom like you've never known." "Does it hurt?" Elijah asked, voicing the fear that had been growing in his mind. "Like hell," James admitted with brutal honesty. "Your bones break and reform, your muscles tear and regrow, your senses explode into something overwhelming. The first time is the worst because you don't know what to expect, and your body fights it. But Father will be there, and the pack will be there, and will help you through it. You won't be alone. And after, what's it like being a wolf?" James's eyes took on a distant look, as if he were remembering something beautiful. "It's like being truly alive for the first time. Everything is sharper, clearer. You can smell things humans can't even imagine. The fear of prey, the approach of a storm, the individual scent of every person in the pack. You can hear a heartbeat from 100 yards away. You can run for miles without getting tired. And the pack bond, when you're all running together, all thinking together, it's like being part of one organism. You're never alone, never separate. You're always connected." As the night wore on, Elijah found himself relaxing in a way he hadn't in years. These people had accepted him without question, had offered him something he'd thought he'd lost forever. A future. A family. A place to belong. When he finally returned to his cabin, exhausted but content, he slept without nightmares for the first time since his father's death. The next day passed in a blur of preparation. Margaret came to his cabin in the morning with a basket of herbs and began explaining what would happen during the ritual. "Thomas, as Alpha, will give you the bite," she said, laying out various plants and roots on his table. "His blood carries the strongest magic, the purest line. The bite will introduce the shifter essence into your body, and then the full moon will activate it, forcing your first transformation." "And these herbs?" Elijah asked, looking at the array of plants. These will help your body accept the change. This one," she held up a root that looked like gnarled wood, "will ease the pain of your bones breaking. This one, a handful of dried leaves, will help your muscles reform without tearing. This one, a powder that smelled bitter, will keep your mind clear during the transformation so you don't lose yourself to the wolf." "Can that happen? Losing yourself?" Margaret's expression grew serious. "It can. Some people, when they first transform, are overwhelmed by the wolf's instincts. They forget they're human, forget who they are. They become pure animal, and sometimes they never find their way back. That's why the pack will be there. Why Thomas will guide you. The Alpha's presence helps anchor new shifters, reminds them of their humanity." She began mixing the herbs into various concoctions, some to drink, some to apply to his skin, some to burn as incense. "You'll drink this one an hour before sunset," she said, handing him a cup of dark liquid that smelled like earth and moss. "It tastes terrible, but it's important. Then, just before the ritual, I'll apply this paste to your chest and back. It'll help the magic spread through your body evenly." "Have you seen many people transformed?" Elijah asked. "A few. Most of our pack are born shifters. The gift passes from parent to child. But occasionally, we bring in outsiders who've proven themselves worthy. You're the first in 5 years." She paused, studying him with her sharp eyes. "Thomas doesn't offer the bite lightly. He must see something special in you." "I don't feel special. I just saved his daughter." "You risked your life for a stranger when you were barely surviving yourself." "That's not common, Elijah. Most people's first instinct is self-preservation. Yours was to help. That's the kind of person we want in the pack. Someone who puts others first. Someone who understands what it means to be part of a family." As evening approached, Elijah drank the bitter herb mixture and tried not to gag. Margaret had been right. It tasted terrible, like drinking mud mixed with vinegar. But within minutes, he felt a warmth spreading through his body, a tingling in his extremities. "That's normal," Margaret assured him when he mentioned it. "Your body is preparing for the change. Now take off your shirt. I need to apply the paste." The paste was cold and smelled strongly of pine, and something else he couldn't identify. Margaret applied it in careful patterns across his chest and back, muttering words in a language Elijah didn't recognize. When she was done, his skin felt tight and tingly. "There," she said, wiping her hands. "You're ready. The pack will be gathering at the clearing soon. It's time." As the sun set and the full moon began to rise, Elijah made his way through the forest to the clearing Margaret had described. It was deep in the woods, far from the settlement, a circular space surrounded by ancient trees. The pack was already there, arranged in a circle just as they had been in the Great Hall, but this time they were outside, under the open sky. The moon was huge, silver and perfect, hanging low on the horizon. Just looking at it made Elijah's skin prickle, made something deep inside him stir and wake. He could feel its pull, like a tide in his blood. Thomas stood at the center of the circle, and he gestured for Elijah to join him. As Elijah walked forward, he noticed that some of the pack members were already beginning to change, their eyes glowing amber, their teeth lengthening, their movements becoming more fluid and animal-like. The transformation was starting, triggered by the rising moon. "Elijah Thorne," Thomas said, his voice taking on a formal, ritualistic tone. "You have chosen to join our pack, to accept our gift, to become one with us. Do you do so freely, with full knowledge of what it means?" "I do," Elijah replied, his voice steady despite his racing heart. "Do you swear to protect the pack, to keep our secrets, to honor our laws and traditions?" "I swear." "Do you accept that you will be changed forever, that there is no going back, that from this night forward you will be both human and wolf, forever walking between two worlds?" "I accept." Then bare your arm and accept the bite of the Alpha. Elijah rolled up his sleeve, exposing his forearm. His hand was shaking slightly, but he forced himself to be still. Thomas stepped closer, and as he did, his transformation began in earnest. His eyes blazed with amber light, his teeth lengthened into fangs, his hands became clawed. The transformation was partial, controlled, a demonstration of the power that ran through his veins, a blending of human and wolf that was both beautiful and terrifying. Thomas took Elijah's arm gently, almost reverently, and then his teeth sank into flesh. The pain was immediate and intense, like fire spreading through Elijah's veins. He gasped, but didn't pull away, didn't cry out. He could feel Thomas's teeth deep in his muscle, could feel something, the shifter essence, the magic, whatever it was, flowing from the Alpha into him. It burned like molten metal, spreading from the bite side up his arm, across his shoulder, into his chest. Thomas held the bite for what felt like an eternity but was probably only seconds, then released him. Blood ran down Elijah's arm, but Margaret was there immediately, wrapping it with cloth soaked in herbs. The pack began to howl, a chorus of voices that was half human, half wolf, a sound that echoed through the mountains and made Elijah's blood sing in response. "Now we wait," Thomas said, his form returning to fully human. "The moon will do the rest." As the moon climbed higher in the sky, Elijah felt the change begin. It started as a fever, heat spreading through his body until he thought he might combust. His skin felt too tight. His bones felt wrong. His senses were beginning to overwhelm him. He could smell everything: the pine trees, the earth, the individual sense of every person in the circle. He could hear things he shouldn't be able to hear: the heartbeat of a deer a mile away, the rustle of a mouse in the underbrush, the whisper of wind through feathers as an owl flew overhead. Then came the pain. His bones began to shift, and it felt like they were breaking, shattering into pieces and reforming in new configurations. He fell to his hands and knees, unable to stand, unable to do anything but endure. His muscles tore and regrew, his spine elongated, his face pushed forward into a muzzle. He wanted to scream, but what came out was a howl, long and wild and full of pain and fear and something else, something primal and free. The pack howled with him, their voices joining his, supporting him, guiding him through the transformation. Thomas was there, his massive black wolf form pressing against Elijah's side, anchoring him, reminding him who he was. Sarah was there too, her smaller brown wolf form on his other side, her presence a comfort. And then, suddenly, it was over. The pain receded, and Elijah stood on 4 legs, his human consciousness still present but filtered through new instincts and senses. He was a wolf, gray and lean, smaller than Thomas's massive black form, but strong and fast. His vision was different, seeing more in shades of blue and yellow but with incredible clarity. His hearing was overwhelming, picking up sounds from miles away, and his sense of smell was beyond anything he could have imagined. He could smell the history of the clearing, could identify every wolf in the pack by scent alone, could smell the emotions rolling off them: pride, joy, welcome. Sarah approached and touched her nose to his, a gesture of welcome and affection. Other wolves came forward too, greeting him, accepting him into the pack. And then, Thomas howled again, a call to run, and the pack responded. They ran through the forest like shadows, like ghosts, like the wind itself. Elijah ran with them, his new body moving with an instinct he didn't know he possessed. They leaped over fallen logs, splashed through icy streams, climbed rocky slopes that would have been impossible for a human. The world was alive in a way Elijah had never experienced. Every scent told a story, every sound painted a picture, every movement was effortless and joyful. For the first time in his life, Elijah felt truly free. Not running from something, but running toward something, toward belonging, toward family, toward a future that was his to claim. The runaway boy was gone, burned away in the fire of transformation. In his place was a wolf, a shifter, a member of the pack. They hunted that night, bringing down a deer with coordinated precision that spoke of years of practice. Elijah participated, his wolf instincts guiding him, teaching him how to move with the pack, how to anticipate their movements, how to work as part of a greater whole. When they fed, it was communal, the alpha eating first, then the rest of the pack in order of rank. Elijah, as the newest member, ate last, but there was plenty for everyone. As dawn approached, they returned to the clearing. The transformation back to human form was easier than the first change, though still painful. Elijah found himself on his hands and knees again, gasping as his body reformed, as fur receded and bones shifted back to their human configuration. When it was over, he was exhausted, but exhilarated, covered in sweat and dirt, but grinning like a madman. Thomas helped him to his feet, and the alpha was grinning too. "Welcome to the pack, Elijah Thorne. You're one of us now. Forever." The winter passed in a blur of learning and growing. Elijah threw himself into understanding what it meant to be a shifter, to be pack. He learned to control his transformations, to shift at will rather than only under the full moon. He learned to hunt, to track, to move through the forest as both man and wolf. He learned the pack's laws: never reveal what you are, never harm another pack member, always protect the weak, always answer the alpha's call, never hunt humans no matter how hungry you are. But more than that, he learned what it meant to have a family again. Thomas became like a father to him, teaching him not just about being a wolf, but about being a man of honor and integrity. Margaret taught him about healing and herbs, skills that would serve him well throughout his life. James became like a brother, sparring with him, hunting with him, teaching him the subtle politics of pack hierarchy. And Sarah became his closest friend, the one who understood him best because she'd been there at the beginning, the reason he'd found this new life. The settlement welcomed him fully. He was given more responsibilities, trusted with important tasks. He helped with the hunting, with the building, with the defense of the territory. He attended pack meetings and had a voice in decisions. He was no longer an outsider, no longer a runaway with no future. He was pack, and that meant everything. Spring came, and with it, a test of his loyalty and courage. A group of hunters from a nearby town had ventured into the mountains, tracking what they thought was a pack of regular wolves that had been taking livestock from outlying farms. The pack knew they had to be careful. If the hunters discovered the truth, if they realized they were dealing with shifters, it would mean disaster for everyone. Exposure would bring hunters, would bring the military, would bring an end to everything they'd built. Thomas called a meeting in the Great Hall, his expression grave. "We need to lead them away," he said, addressing the assembled pack. "Make them think the wolves have moved on to other territory. But we have to be smart about it. If anyone gets shot, if anyone gets captured, the secret is out. They'll see the transformation when we die or when we heal too quickly. We can't risk that." "I'll do it," Elijah said, standing up before he could second-guess himself. "I'm the fastest runner after James, and I'm still new enough that I can play the part of a regular wolf if I need to. Let me lead them away." "It's too dangerous," Thomas said immediately. "You're pack now, Elijah. We don't risk pack members unnecessarily. But I'm the logical choice. You know I am." Elijah looked around the circle, seeing the concern on their faces. "You gave me a home when I had nothing. You gave me a family. Let me do this for the pack. Let me prove that I'm worthy of what you've given me." There was a long silence as Thomas considered. Finally, he nodded slowly. "All right, but you don't go alone. James and Marcus will go with you, keep you safe from a distance. And you come back, you understand. You come back to us. That's an order from your alpha." "I will," Elijah promised. "I swear it." That night, Elijah transformed and set out to where the hunters had made camp. There were 5 of them, armed with rifles and accompanied by dogs. The dogs caught his scent immediately and began barking frantically, straining at their leashes. Elijah let them see him. Just a glimpse, a gray wolf at the edge of their firelight, eyes reflecting the flames. Then he ran, heading deeper into the mountains, away from Wolfridge. The hunters followed at first light, excited by the chase, never knowing they were being led exactly where the wolf wanted them to go. Elijah was careful, staying just ahead of them, leaving clear tracks in the mud and snow. He led them through difficult terrain, over rocky slopes and through dense thickets, tiring them out while conserving his own energy. James and Marcus shadowed him from a distance, staying hidden but ready to intervene if things went wrong. They communicated through howls that sounded like regular wolves to the hunters, but carried specific meanings to the pack. All clear. Change direction. Danger ahead. For 3 days, Elijah played this dangerous game, always staying just ahead of the hunters, always leading them further from Wolfridge. He had close calls. Once, a hunter got off a shot that came close enough that Elijah felt the wind of the bullet passing. Another time, the dogs nearly caught up to him, and he had to leap across a ravine that they couldn't follow. On the 4th day, he led the hunters to the edge of pack territory, to a valley where regular wolf packs were known to den. He'd scouted it beforehand with James, confirming that there was indeed a natural wolf pack there. Then he disappeared, circling back through the forest to return home, leaving the hunters to find the regular wolves. The hunters, finding signs of a large wolf pack, tracks, scat, kill sites, assumed their quarry had joined the natural pack. They managed to shoot one of the regular wolves, an old male, and declared their mission successful. They returned to town with the pelt, satisfied that they'd dealt with the problem. When Elijah returned to Wolfridge, exhausted and hungry but unharmed, the entire pack was waiting. Thomas embraced him like a son, and Sarah hugged him so tightly he could barely breathe. That night, there was another feast, a celebration of his bravery and his success. "You've proven yourself," Thomas said, raising a cup in toast. "Not just as pack, but as family. You risked yourself for all of us, led those hunters away with skill and courage. That's what it means to be one of us. That's what it means to be pack." The years passed, and Elijah grew from a boy into a man. He became one of the pack's best hunters, one of their most trusted scouts. He helped train younger members when they came of age and received the bite. The pack occasionally brought in outsiders who had proven themselves worthy, people who needed a home and a family just as Elijah had. He became a leader in his own right, someone the pack looked to for guidance and protection. He watched Sarah grow from a girl into a young woman, strong and capable, her father's daughter in every way. He watched James prepare to eventually take over as alpha when Thomas grew too old. He watched the settlement grow and prosper, new cabins built, new families welcomed, the pack becoming stronger with each passing year. But he never forgot that winter day when he'd pulled a drowning girl from an icy pond. That single act of courage had changed everything, had given him a family, a purpose, a life worth living. He'd been a runaway boy with nothing, and the pack had made him into something more. They'd given him a home, given him belonging, given him a reason to live, rather than just survive. On the 10th anniversary of his joining, Thomas called him to the Great Hall. The alpha was older now, his dark hair shot through with silver, lines deepening around his eyes. But he was still strong, still commanding, still the undisputed leader of the pack. "I'm not getting any younger," Thomas said without preamble. "And the pack needs to know who will lead them when I'm gone. I've made my decision, Elijah. When the time comes, I want you to be alpha." Elijah stared at him in shock, his mind reeling. But James, he's your son. He's been training for this his whole life. James is a fine man and a strong wolf, but he doesn't have your heart, Thomas said firmly. He's too much like me, strong, decisive, but sometimes too rigid. You understand what it means to protect the weak because you were weak once. You understand what it means to be loyal because you chose this life when you could have walked away. You understand what it means to lead with compassion because you know what it's like to suffer. The pack needs that kind of leader. Does James know? He knows. And he agrees. He'll be your second, your right hand, but you'll be alpha. Thomas placed a hand on Elijah's shoulder. I know this is a lot to take in. You don't have to decide right now. But think about it. The pack needs you, Elijah. I need you. I don't know if I'm ready, Elijah admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. No one ever is, but you will be, when the time comes. And until then, I'll teach you everything you need to know. Thomas smiled, and it was warm and genuine. You came to us as a runaway boy, Elijah Thorne. But you became so much more. You became pack. You became family. And one day, you'll become alpha. That's the life the pack gave you, and that's the life you've earned. Elijah looked out the window at the settlement beyond, at the families going about their evening routines, at the children playing in the fading light. This was his home. These were his people. And he would spend the rest of his life protecting them, just as they had protected him. Over the following years, Thomas began preparing Elijah for leadership. He taught him the history of the pack, the old laws that had been passed down through generations. He taught him how to mediate disputes, how to make difficult decisions, how to balance the needs of individuals against the needs of the pack as a whole. He taught him the responsibilities of an alpha, to protect, to guide, to sometimes make choices that would hurt in the short term, but help in the long term. Elijah learned about the other shifter packs scattered throughout the Appalachians, the delicate politics between territories, the alliances and rivalries that had existed for generations. He learned about the threats they faced, hunters who suspected the truth, rival packs who wanted their territory, the constant danger of exposure in a world that feared what it didn't understand. He also learned about the gifts that came with being alpha. The alpha's bite was stronger, could turn humans into shifters. The alpha's presence could calm or command the pack, could force transformations or prevent them. The alpha was the anchor, the center around which the pack revolved. It was a heavy responsibility, but also a sacred trust. Sarah, now a woman of 22, became one of his closest advisors. She had her father's strength and her mother's wisdom, and she understood the pack dynamics better than anyone, except Thomas himself. She and Elijah spent long hours discussing pack business, planning for the future, working together to ensure the pack's survival and prosperity. "You're going to be a good alpha," she told him one evening as they sat on the porch of the great hall, watching the sun set over the mountains. "Better than good. You're going to be great." "I'm terrified," Elijah admitted. "What if I make the wrong choice? What if I lead them into danger? Then you'll deal with it. That's what leaders do." She turned to look at him, her dark eyes serious. "You saved my life when you were just a scared boy running from your past. You've saved this pack more times than I can count. You have good instincts, Elijah. Trust them." When Thomas finally stepped down as alpha, it was during a ceremony under the full moon, with the entire pack gathered in the sacred clearing. He was 60 years old, still strong but ready to pass the mantle to the next generation. "Elijah Thorne," Thomas said, his voice carrying through the clearing. "I name you Alpha of the Wolfridge Pack. I give you my authority, my responsibility, my trust. Lead them well, protect them fiercely, love them deeply, and remember always that the pack is family, and family is everything." Elijah knelt before Thomas, and the old alpha placed his hands on Elijah's head, transferring the alpha power in a ritual as old as the pack itself. Elijah felt it flow into him, a surge of strength, of authority, of connection to every member of the pack. He could feel them all, could sense their emotions, their loyalty, their trust. It was overwhelming and humbling and terrifying and wonderful all at once. When he stood, his eyes glowed with the amber light of an alpha, and the pack howled their acceptance. He was their leader now, their protector, their alpha, and he would spend the rest of his life honoring that trust. The years that followed were challenging, but rewarding. Elijah led the pack through good times and bad, through harsh winters and bountiful summers, through conflicts with rival packs and threats from the human world. He made decisions that were difficult, that sometimes hurt, but that always put the pack's welfare first. He watched the children he'd helped train grow into strong adults. He welcomed new members into the pack, giving them the same chance at belonging that he'd been given. He formed alliances with other packs, creating a network of shifters throughout the Appalachians who could support and protect each other. And through it all, he never forgot where he'd come from. He never forgot the runaway boy who'd been so desperate and alone that he'd nearly frozen to death in the mountains. He never forgot the moment he'd decided to save a drowning girl instead of saving himself. That choice had changed everything, had set him on a path he never could have imagined. Sarah eventually became his mate, the bond between them deepening from friendship into something more profound. They had children who carried the shifter gift, who would one day lead the pack into the future. The cycle continued, generation after generation, the pack enduring and thriving in their mountain home. On the 50th anniversary of the day he'd pulled Sarah from the icy pond, the pack gathered to celebrate. Elijah was 64 years old now, his hair gray, his face lined with age. But he was still strong, still capable, still the alpha who had led them through half a century of challenges and triumphs. 50 years ago, he said, addressing the assembled pack, I was a boy with nothing, no family, no home, no future. I was running from a past I couldn't escape and toward a future I couldn't see. And then I made a choice. I chose to help someone who needed it, even though it might have cost me my life. That choice brought me here. That choice gave me everything I have, this pack, this family, this life. He looked around at all the faces watching him, some he'd known for decades, some who were new to the pack, all of them his responsibility, all of them his family. I tell you this because I want you to understand what it means to be pack. It means making the hard choice. It means putting others before yourself. It means being willing to sacrifice for the greater good. But it also means never being alone. It means always having someone to stand with you, to fight for you, to love you. That's what this pack gave me 50 years ago. And that's what we must continue to give to each other and to those who come after us. The pack howled their agreement, their voices rising into the night sky, echoing through the mountains that had been their home for generations. And Elijah howled with them, his voice strong and clear, the voice of an alpha who had earned his place through courage and compassion and an unwavering commitment to his family. He'd been a runaway boy once, dragging a drowning girl from icy water, never knowing that in saving her life, he was saving his own. The pack had changed his life, had given him everything he'd thought he'd lost. And now, after 50 years, he understood the truth. He hadn't just found a home that day. He'd found his destiny.